let's be honest for a second here.
Yeah.
You definitely have that one junk drawer at home.
Oh,
You know the one.
ooh, filled with dead batteries and mystery keys.
Right, exactly. And half-chewed pens. I mean, losing things is practically a human specialty.
Mm.
But when it comes to the Bible, arguably the most scrutinized and preserved text in human history, you would think we'd have a perfect inventory of every single page.
You really would. But looking at the stack of historical analyses and theological research you shared with us for this deep dive, it's clear we're dealing with a massive literary puzzle.
Exactly. Our mission today is to explore the lost books of the Bible. Because the text we have, it constantly acts like a sequel, referencing prequels that simply do not exist anywhere. Okay, let's unpack this.
It's a very strange experience for the reader. You are moving through the text, and suddenly the author references another book entirely, assuming you can just pull it off a shelf.
Yeah, I saw in the research notes a mention of the Book of the Wars of the Lord. What exactly was that?
So scholars in our sources describe it almost like an ancient Israelite Marvel cinematic universe.
A Marvel universe.
Yeah, it was a collection of epic victory ballads. Back
Hmm.
then, if you crossed the Arnon River and won a battle, you wrote a gritty cinematic poem about it. It gets this tantalizing shout-out in the Book of Numbers, but the text itself is just gone.
And what about the Book of Jasher? The notes say the Book of Joshua actually cites it to verify the moment the sun allegedly stood still.
Yes, Jasher, or the Book of the Upright. That was considered the gold standard of history at the time. The authors cite it as historical proof. What's fascinating here is that these weren't just whimsical stories. These were raw, incredibly fragile state archives. Take the Acts of Solomon, for example.
We have the biblical summary of Solomon's life, sure, but I imagine the Acts contained a lot more of the day-to-day administrative details.
Exactly. It likely contained the actual architectural blueprints for the temple, specific trade logs.
And probably all the daily court scandals.
No, absolutely. All the stuff that didn't make it into the final theological narrative. And those grand royal archives mentioned throughout the text, those were just raw military and tax records.
And those were all written on papyrus, which obviously doesn't survive long-term unless it happens to be sealed in a bone-dry desert cave.
That, and they were politically vulnerable. When the Babylonians turned the first temple into a bonfire in 586 BCE, a massive chunk of Israel's filing cabinets literally went up in smoke.
Wow, so that covers the ancient state archives? But moving to the New Testament, Paul's letters have their own missing files.
They really do.
He explicitly tells the church in Colossians to swap letters with the church in Laodicea. But the Laodicean letter is nowhere to be found.
It's a total 404 error. And it gets even deeper with 1 Corinthians, where Paul actually writes, I wrote to you in my letter.
Wait, meaning the book we call 1 Corinthians is actually 2 Corinthians? There is a lost 0 Corinthians out there.
That is the historical consensus, yes. He sent an initial letter that simply didn't survive.
So how do scholars process this? Does knowing there is a 0 Corinthians undermine the completeness of the texts we actually do have?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, theologians in our sources argue for a concept called the sufficiency of Scripture. The argument posits that the 66-book Bible we have today isn't an accidental collection. From their perspective, it contains exactly what is needed for its spiritual purpose. One source uses a really great analogy.
Thinking of the lost books as the scaffolding, right?
Right. Those fragile papyrus records and raw state archives were the necessary scaffolding used to build the narrative.
But once the cathedral is finished, the scaffolding is taken down.
Exactly. You don't need the rough drafts when you have the finished masterpiece.
I understand the theological argument there, but doesn't calling them scaffolding kind of downplay the historical value of what we lost? From a purely historical perspective, I would still really want to see those temple blueprints.
Oh, from a historical standpoint, absolutely. Archaeologists would give anything to dig up those blueprints. The scaffolding argument is strictly addressing the spiritual utility of the final canon, not its historical completeness.
That makes sense. It reminds you that these empty spaces aren't necessarily holes in the faith, but deeply human reminders of our fragility. Empires fade and paperwork turns to dust, but the core message endures.
This raises an important question, though.
Okay.
Think about that missing 0 Corinthians letter. If a shepherd boy actually stumbled into a Judean cave tomorrow and found that exact letter perfectly preserved in a clay jar,
Yeah.
would the religious world actually add it to the Bible, or would they just treat it as a museum artifact?
Oh man, that is a wild thought to leave off on.
Oh,
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today, and to you listening, as always, keep exploring.